Hello, Doone. Welcome to our show. I'm so happy to have you here after being on yours.
Hi, Ellen. I'm so excited to be here.
So, if you haven't listened to my conversation with Doone on her podcast, Female Startup Club, make sure you give it a listen. It's one of our personal favorites here at Team Cubicle to CEO. We love supporting other women focused shows and platforms like what Doone has created with Female Startup Club. Now, Doone, I know you've had quite a journey to where you are currently. We're kind of in a similar stage right now of our business, building media brands and media businesses. But, you come from e-commerce and that's really what your content is focused around, supporting other e-commerce brands. What is your cubicle to CEO story? How'd you make that leap from employee to entrepreneur?
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess it starts a long time ago when I was just starting out in my career. I was doing all the things, I was doing all the internships, trying to get experience, and I landed working at a startup in Australia called The Iconic. It's one of the leading platforms here for e-commerce and shopping. It's kind of like Net-a-Porter cross ASOS or something like that. And at that time, I was in my early 20s. I had no idea what an entrepreneur was. I didn't know what a startup was. I know that at that time, or I knew at that time, you could own a business, but I didn't have the language or anything like that. And I started working there as an intern, worked my way up to head of organic social. And I started to really notice that when I was looking around, I couldn't see myself in my manager. I was like, okay, I don't want to be my manager. I don't really want to be my boss. But I was like, the guys at the top have got it all going on. This seems so fun. And I think that's where I really got the itch that someday I could potentially do something for myself. I didn't know what, I didn't know how. It was just kind of a seed that was planted. And then fast forward a few years, I moved to London in the UK and I was dotting around different places and kind of working remotely for some companies, doing a lot of freelance work. And I ended up being in the 9 to 5 grind and coming from a startup environment, which was super fun. You got to wear lots of different hats. It was scrappy. It was in a room with the smartest people that you could imagine doing these crazy things and innovating on technology and educating the market and all these different things. I then went into the corporate 9 to 5 and I really saw that I didn't fit in there. For me, it wasn't my vibe. I struggle with authority. I was bored. I was sitting at my desk being like, oh, this is so weird. I'm working in a silo, all the rest of it. And I happened to meet this guy, and this guy was like, well, you hate your job, why don't you come and join me? I'm building a tech business. You can launch the content arm of the business and it'll be a content agency. It'll fund the development of the tech and you can do whatever you want. You can run that, get a lot of experience along the way, and then go off and do your own thing after that. So I said yes. I promptly quit my job. I kind of started on that journey, and it was an easy intro into a business that didn't have kind of all the stress on me. But we built that business up. We had 10 people coming to our apartment every day working for us until we got told that we'd get evicted. And that was kind of the intro to entrepreneurship. That guy, funnily enough, now happens to be my husband. That tech business is, pumping on one side over here. And I've learned a lot through him and what he's up to. But that was really the beginning of it. And from there, what happened was I remember that I had this specific moment that I remember where I was sitting on a panel talking at Tech Week about tech companies and the tax benefits from moving from Australia to the UK and all these kinds of things. And I was like, damn, like this isn't it for me. Like I'm not there yet. I need to keep finding what I want to do for myself because it's been so great building this business. I've learned a lot, but now I'm like ready to start doing my own thing. So I very casually started building a D2C jewelry brand. I came from an e-commerce background. I wanted to use my skill set that I already have. And I'm someone who loves tangible products. I love packaging. I love bright colors. I wanted to bring my personality out through a brand. And so I did that for a couple of years, learned a lot, and just had the best time. That was my introduction to building my first brand on my own.
Amazing. And if I remember correctly about your story, you started interviewing other female founders, other women owned direct to consumer or e-commerce brands because you kind of felt a little bit alone in the journey, like you weren't seeing that type of content out there for someone like yourself. Is my memory serving me correctly?
Yeah, yeah. So the reason why I started doing these quick interviews was I was feeling a little stuck myself with the jewelry brand. So, we were making six figures in the year. We were kind of getting there, but I was really like fighting hard for those sales. And I was like, the solo founder, like doing everything myself. And so I was trying to figure out like what's that next stage? Like how do I level up to like get more happening? And I needed to get advice from other people around me, whether they were women in tech or women who are service providers or just any kind of entrepreneur who was in my network. I was knocking them. I was tapping them on the shoulder, being like, hey, can I ask you some questions? And so, as I was kind of having these conversations and being privy to so much valuable information, I started being like, well, if I'm learning a lot from this, maybe I could share this with other people. And so I started very casually, very, very casually, just with my phone, recording these quick 5 to 10 minute videos with a certain number of questions. And I would post them on IGTV. And I don't know if you remember IGTV, but it's not very discoverable. It was not a great user experience. And so no one was really seeing those videos, but I really enjoyed it. And I was like, this is really cool. And my husband was like, maybe you should start a podcast. And my instant reaction was like, oh, hell no. Like, absolutely not. I'm terrified of public speaking. I'm absolutely terrified of being on the camera. This is like, I'm really pushing my boundary to even put this on Instagram. And I don't have any know how in that. I don't have any skills in that. Like, absolutely not. But then as I sat with that feeling, I was like, damn, it's actually a skill that I would love to have. I want to get better at this. I know how powerful it is to be able to tell a story. I know how powerful it is to communicate and just language in general. And so I was like, maybe I should lean into this because it's scary and get a bit better at that. And so that's really how the podcast started. But it was around that same time that I was reading a book called Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss. And if you know the book, it's really big. It's like, this big if anyone's seeing this on camera. And it's amazing. It's this direct, no bullshit advice from amazing, successful athletes, billionaires, high performers in general. But what I found as I was reading the book is that I loved the approach, but where were the women? And I think there's only either 10 women in there or 10% of the book was women. And I was like, I want to hear that same no bullshit direct advice and insights and approach, but from successful women. And so, my wheels were turning and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to start it from my bedroom floor, like where all good things start, and see what happens.
Amazing. So it really started from, and I think this is so smart of you, by the way, like such a fun life hack if you really want to learn from someone. But, I think we all kind of try to shy away from the, hey, can I just pick your brain for free type of request, right? So you were really smart because you approach these women with a value add from the get go. Like, hey, can I interview you? Can I feature you? And it really gave them a reason, I think, to say yes, right, to that conversation. But then in a roundabout way, you kind of get to be mentored by these women to ask the questions that you wanted to ask anyways, or would have paid to ask in a consultation type of setting. But instead, you're doing it through media or through free interviews. And so I think that's so smart of you. First off, so kudos. Kudos for getting scrappy. And then also major kudos for being willing to lean into something that felt so scary and so out of your element. I think that it's, you know, so much of the so many of the best things that have happened in my business, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Doone, have come out of or been born out of things that scared me or were not in my element, things that I didn't really have a full grasp or understanding around, but just deciding to take that first step and then see where it leads you. I think so much of that magic happens there. So
Absolutely.
that kind of leads us perfectly to the case study at hand today, which is you launched your show, your podcast, Female Startup Club, and you landed your first sponsorship deal for $25,000. And this was early on, right? Was this literally right at launch, or how old was your podcast when you secured this deal?
So I've got kind of two launch periods. I officially started posting on the actual, like if you go way back to the beginning, I think it's like November 2019 when I started uploading these like 10-minute like recordings on my phone. And at that point it was super casual. I think I uploaded like a couple of episodes, wasn't really going anywhere. But when the pandemic hit and we were going to be all locked down at home 24/7, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm obviously not going to be recording these things in person. Maybe this is the shift that I need to do everything online. And then I can access amazing people from all over the world. It doesn't need to be where I am. And so it was then that I kind of, say that we really started when I started taking it seriously. And I think that was around May 2020, around that kind of time. And the advice at that time that I was reading out in the world on the internet was, don't go out and get sponsors until you have hundreds of thousands of downloads and you've proven everything, and then go out and find, because you'll have that proven track record and things like that. But for me, I wanted to publish 100 episodes in that first year. That was my goal. And at that point being, I think it was May, I needed to publish at least 3 episodes a week to be able to hit that goal. So I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to publish 3 episodes a week, I'm going to need an editor, because my husband had edited like 2 episodes and it was a disaster in terms of me being like, but what about this? And what about this? And him being like, oh, Jesus, like you need to find someone to help you. And so basically with that thought process, I was like, okay, well, if I need to get an editor, then I need to invest money. So like I need to like kind of launch into this. I'm not going to take that advice and wait, because who knows how long that takes. I've never built a podcast before. I had no clue. I'm going to go out and get a sponsor straight away. And so my immediate kind of thing at hand was book amazing guests, yes. Publish great content, yes, but also go out and find sponsors or distribution partners that can help either put revenue in the door and create this into an online business, or can distribute my content at scale and help me find new listeners.
I love the rebel in you. Amazing. I really like that you kind of just stare down that, advice and say, no, I'm going to do it a different way. And it made sense in your case. Like you said, you actually needed the money to hire an editor. So it was your way, essentially, right, of bootstrapping the expenses that come along with producing that volume of content. Which, by the way, before I ask you my next question about this case study, I'm just curious, why 100 episodes in the first year? Was that more of a personal challenge because you just wanted to stretch your own, I don't know, limits, or was it a strategic move?
It was just a goal for a goal's sake. For me, I was like, I love a good goal. I set a good, like, big goal that will take me a year to do at the start of every year. Last year, it was publishing the book. The year before that, it was the 100 episodes. And I was just like, 100 sounds nice. And I want to basically not look at the numbers too much and just focus on like seeing where I land after doing 100 episodes. At that point, you can go back to my old content. I'm not as confident. I'm a bit shaky. I'm really finding my feet. And I knew that it would take me a while to find my feet. So I wanted to be like, okay, I will commit myself to 100 episodes. I've audited myself. I know that I can produce 3 episodes a week. I know that I can do that many interviews. I know that I can publish that much content. I just want to see what happens after 100, because you can give yourself a test patch of 5 episodes, sure. But not a lot might happen in that 5 episodes. For me, I needed to test on a bigger scale to then determine, do I have something here? Can I build an audience? Can I turn this into a business that actually drives revenue for me and can support me? And I needed a good testing ground. So 100, I guess it is strategic. 100 felt like a good number to get started.
I was just about to add, maybe it wasn't strategic in the moment that you decided it, but in hindsight, it sounds really strategic.
Yeah.
And I want to pull this out for the listeners, regardless of if you have a podcast and this direct medium applies to you or not. It's actually irrelevant. What I want you to pull from what Doone just said is the fact that to be good at anything, you have to give yourself enough repetition to even be able to identify patterns, right? And to her point, if you uploaded 5 episodes and then you gave up and you were like, they weren't so good, you really don't have enough data to measure to really make an informed decision. And so I love that you set out from the get go to no matter what, just publish 100 episodes. And it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't about how good those episodes were. And it wasn't about what those 100 episodes would do for your show long term, but rather just keeping your focus on, okay, if I can just achieve this output, I'll do the output first so that I don't filter myself out. And then I'll look at what happened and determine from there what the next best step is. And I just think that's so smart. I don't think enough founders really think through that when they're approaching a new endeavor. And so I just wanted to really reiterate that for our listeners because I feel very inspired by that. So thank
Thank
you for
you.
sharing that.
And there's a stat out there that's like most people start a podcast and they give up at like 7 episodes. So if I was to look back at my first 5 episodes or my first 10 episodes, like, damn, like, no way would I be continuing. So in hindsight, I can really see that you really need to give yourself time. And even I think it was around the episode 70 mark is when I started to find my groove. I started feeling a lot more confident, and I actually had my audience reaching out to be like, I've listened to you from the beginning. I've like seen the evolution and I'm really enjoying this for you because you've found it. You found your groove. And that's like a really great example of why you should really give yourself the proper testing ground and go that full journey to then decide.
Absolutely. So going back to this sponsorship then. So you said you described to us the two quote unquote launches that you had, the second one being right around May 2020 when you committed to publishing 100 episodes before year's end. So this sponsor that came to you, was this a sponsor that you pitched and had a previous relationship with, or was this a cold pitch? Was this an inbound relationship? Give us a little bit of the background there.
Definitely a cold pitch. I did not have any relationship to this company. I'd never worked with them before. I didn't have a contact, nothing like that. So my approach was, as with everything in business, creating a list, work through the list. So I created a list of people who, really suited the audience that I was going after, who kind of would add value to my audience, but also value to me. I was also thinking tech businesses. Tech businesses have budget for podcasts. I was looking at other podcasts in the space to see who was advertising at the time to understand who has budget for the podcast advertising. And so I made a list and I put together a template explaining my vision and started sending out to that list. And, spreadsheet, classic spreadsheet, name, company, website, who's the contact, if there's no contact, contact form, link, that kind of stuff. And funnily enough, this particular deal, I just sent off a quick message on a contact form. I didn't know who it was going to. I didn't know if it was going to be read by anyone. And I just really simply explained my vision, what I was looking for. And I wasn't pitching a certain deal or anything in that message. It was actually just to get on a call. The sell was, let's get on a call and chat and see what we can do, because as I mentioned, I was looking for sponsorship, but I was also looking for distribution partners. So if someone could come to me and be like, yep, great, you can create content, and we'll distribute it to our email list or our website or whatever it might be and give you backlinks, that was great for me. I was really interested in that. So I had no particular pitch specifically other than let's get on a call. And I went to bed. I woke up the next day. 10 hours later, I have an email being like, hey, yeah, let's get on a call. And of course, there's a little bit of right place, right time that plays into these things. You have to work hard, you have to plan, you have to have strategy, but also right place, right time. For this particular brand, they were looking specifically for partners in exactly the industry that I was doing. They wanted more female founded voices. And so it was just the right time, and we were able to get on a call. We nutted out all the details, and then eventually we landed on a deal for $25,000. And that is really what gave me the confidence to be like, okay, this is something, there's interest here. This is a signal for me to pursue this, and I can hire my editor and we can get cracking. We can go to the races.
All right, we have Doone in the hot seat for lightning round. Doone, I'm going to fire 3 questions your way. Answer whatever comes to mind first. Are you ready?
Oh my gosh, I don't know, maybe. Let's do it.
We'll start with an easy one. What is your favorite season and why?
Oh. Absolutely summer. I am a summer girl. I grew up in Queensland, Australia, which is called the Sunshine State, and it was hot all year round. And so for me, I am like, take me to the beach, put me out in the sun, and I'm happy. And it's a very easy answer.
I am the same. 100% sunshine, summer, that is my jam.
Yeah, hibiscus flowers, cold drinks, love it.
Oh my gosh, I need to visit Australia. That is on my bucket list. Speaking of travel, that leads me to my second question. The podcast and everything you've done with it has obviously brought you to some really cool places, but most notably and most recently, you got an invite to Buckingham Palace and you were recognized by royalty themselves for your contribution. So, I wanted to ask you, what is something that surprised you the most about your visit to Buckingham Palace, whether it was something about a person or the actual place?
I mean, I was just so surprised to be there. I was standing there just in absolute awe and like surreal vibes of like how am I here? This is amazing. But something that really stood out to me was when I met Charles, the King of England. He was just so deeply like someone who really connects. He really like gave me time. He asked me about my business. He asked me what I was doing. He told a couple of jokes. He was just so charming. And it's something that with royalty, I guess you see it on TV, you do expect them to be like that. They're people, they're for the people. But in real life, it was just so it was like a big warm cozy hug. It was so bizarre and so amazing, and I just was standing there being like, wow, this is a real moment that I'll remember forever.
I can imagine. I mean, I don't know about you. Do you watch The Crown on Netflix?
I do watch The Crown on Netflix.
Oh my god. Okay. Well, hearing that's a lovely answer. And I'm glad, because I feel like King Charles in specific, very rarely gets positive press, at least in the time period that the current season of The Crown is covering. And obviously it's fictionalized, but I love hearing that. And I think it's always such a nice like delight when you meet someone that um like you mentioned is in the public eye a lot, but they surprise you with how much they care about the actual details. So thank you
You
for
know,
sharing a little.
and just to add to that, he really has been so remarkable in what he's done for underprivileged people in the UK. I think it was on The Crown. It's He's helped over 1 million young people with the Prince's Trust, and they're so active in what they're doing for young entrepreneurs, young people in business, people trying to get their lives, started and access things like capital and mentorship, and it's really quite remarkable what they've managed to do.
Yeah, I remember seeing that on the show too, and I was very surprised because I had actually never heard of it before. And so, yes, to your point, there's so many sides to what people do privately that we don't necessarily have access to all the time. And not to judge a book by its cover. So, great answer. All right, final question for you. If you were given a chance to explore the oceans, like deep oceans, go to outer space, or visit 50 different countries, which one would you choose and why?
Oh my gosh. That is so hard. Hmm. What would I choose? I think I would do 50 different countries. I think the world is so amazing. Culture is so amazing. People are just incredible. I think I would want to travel all over the world, meet different people, and see how other people live.
I love that answer. What's your favorite bonus question? What's your favorite place you've ever visited?
Oh my gosh, I have so many for different reasons. But I spent 6 months living in Indonesia, in Bali in 2019. And it's like such a cliche answer. Like, I'm the girl who absolutely loves Eat, Pray, Love, the movie. I'm all about it. But actually, I just so loved it. I'm like, chickens in the background. That's your like soundtrack for the day. It's just a different way of living. And I had the best time. So I really love Bali.
All right, I'm sold. I mean, I was already sold, but I gotta go to Bali. So
You've got to go to Bali. It's amazing.
good rec. Thanks, Dune. You crushed it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you really, I mean, went off to the races with a really strong start. But to your point, there was a lot of preparation and work that you had already put into the show by that point, even though you had not yet reached your 100 episodes. You had just set that goal, but the podcast itself had already been around for a couple months. And um I I really want to reemphasize what you said about how your approach was not to pitch a company, hey, I have this package for this amount of money, would you be interested, yes or no, right? It was really selling them on, let's have a conversation. And I think that piece, leading with curiosity and being willing to come to the table and say, here's what I have to offer. Let's hear about what you are interested in and how we can mutually support those goals, and then figure out what that might look like from there. And I really appreciate that you said whether it ended up being a monetary sponsorship or whether the value ended up being that they could distribute your content to their audience, both were valuable to you, right? And you didn't know going in which it would be, but I think that the way that you approached it was so smart, and so many people can learn from that as well, is to lead with that curiosity. And I think there's no better setting to have a sales or collaboration conversation than on a call. I just think email can't quite replicate that. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think another thing I'd like to add is like on these calls, you also want to find out if they're the right partner for you. You need to, it's like an interview. You need to interview back. You need to find out if it's an alignment, if actually what their KPIs and their goals and what they're working for in that quarter or in that month or whatever it might be actually aligns with you so you can both get the best value out of the deal. And so always now when I approach partnerships and sponsor deals and things like that, it's about understanding that person's KPIs and whatever the company goals are at that time.
Absolutely.
Relationships. It's all relationships.
Everything in business is a relationship. 100%. Let's get into a few more of those nitty gritty details of the actual deal. So let's talk about the deal structure. You got on this call, right, with this brand. You're figuring out what goals they have, what key performance indicators they care about. So let's start there actually. Let's start with the end in mind. What did the company tell you were their success metrics? Like, hey, Doone, if we sponsor your show, this is what we're looking for.
So they at the time were in a very scale up stage of their business. So they were looking to become more of a household name in business. They wanted people to instantly recognize their name. So for them, what mattered was as many ears as possible hearing their brand name. That was the goal. And goals can vary for different companies. Some companies are specifically looking to drive traffic. They're specifically putting out, we hear a lot of offers for companies like Athletic Greens or BetterHelp, and they have codes, like promotion codes, so they can drive people to their website. They can understand who's signing up, who their target audiences are, and build those customer profiles around that. And this was a little bit different in that they wanted their name just on repeat, on repeat, on repeat. And so for them, the goal was reach more women in e-commerce and get their name out there. So for me, it was perfect. I was like, okay, great. I'm about to start, at that point, I literally think I had 4,000 downloads. I was at the very beginning of the podcast. And I was like, great, I'm going to commit all of my time and effort to marketing my show, getting the word out there, and then thus getting your word out there. And so that was it at the beginning.
That's really helpful to hear, them sharing that vision or what they would deem a successful outcome of your partnership. And then you kind of working backwards to say, okay, how do I fulfill? How do I deliver on that? So, with their number one goal being reach, for you, what was the best way for you to do that? In this particular instance, were you approaching that as having them play as, let's say, a host read ad in each episode that aired during that campaign window? Was it doing branded content, branded episodes? How did you approach that from a content perspective?
So it was a few years ago. So I can't 100% remember the specifics, but we did definitely host read ads in the show. We did social posts. We did different kinds of cross collaborations. I would have an interview on their channels or their blog or something like that, and vice versa. We had them on our website as a partner. There was a few different elements to it. It wasn't just a podcast ad. Um, Yeah. It's hard because it was a few years ago, so I actually don't remember the specifics, but all those kinds of things.
No, that's actually great because, it kind of brings to light that even if someone works with you, let's say in your case to sponsor your podcast, it doesn't mean you can't leverage other assets you have, right? Like you said, you were sharing them across social, you were doing cross promotions on their channels. So you can kind of like think outside the direct channel that a sponsorship may have originally been placed for, which I think is really helpful for our listeners who may have not really dived much into this world, which is also why I want to, however comfortable you feel sharing, talk more about the actual deal terms, because I think for a lot of, women, we don't get a lot of opportunities, and this is something that I appreciate about you, Dune, and I think why we resonated right off the bat is we're both very transparent about numbers and data and income. And unfortunately, that's not the norm yet. I say yet, hoping that someday it will be the norm. But for this deal, for a 25K deal, how do you actually how do you actually structure that deal? Was it a paid in full sponsorship up front? Did they pay that 25,000 out over a period of a year, a quarter? Like talk to us
Mhm.
about the more of like the deal structure, if you will.
Okay. So in the podcast, and you all know this, you have a certain number of inventory kind of ad spots that you can sell. And so for me, that ad was or that deal rather, was a partnership for a year and it was paid out quarterly. So they paid up front for the first quarter. We worked out, made sure that all of our obligations were fulfilled, second quarter, third quarter, etc. And so it was over the course of the year. It was one ad. And yeah, it was really a simple I invoice, they pay scenario. And they paid, which is actually a little bit different in the industry now. It feels like people pay behind the fact. You create first and invoices get paid after, but I'm a big believer in getting invoices paid up front, especially as indie creators. And I'm sure you've experienced this. I like to focus on what I do best, which is creating content and not chasing invoices. So I always try to enter these kinds of negotiations and brand deals and sponsorship deals with payment upfront. If it's not payment upfront, it's 50% upfront. And having that kind of relationship, I find payment after the fact can just be, tearing your hair out situations.
I agree. I totally agree. And I mean, we could have a whole separate conversation around the power dynamics at play between large corporations and small businesses, where small businesses unfairly hold much of the burden of having to manage their already limited cash flow by extending essentially free credit to large companies, allowing them to pay net 30, 60, 90 after the fact, when large corporations actually have much more access to resources to be able to fund those orders up front. So there's certainly an inequity there for sure. But of course, in your case, I know you were working with at the time a smaller brand. So but I think you bringing that point up is important for our listeners, because I'm sure there's some people listening to this right now who maybe have never charged upfront for any sort of invoice. And if that's you, I highly encourage you to, in 2023, as you're listening to this, start testing what that looks like to ask for payment upfront and to say, I'm not able to complete or deliver this service until I have money in my account, deposited in my account. And maybe that is sharing the risk 50-50, but if you're able to get the full payment upfront, I do think that is huge for your small business. So
And I think
thank you, Dune.
I think as well, like it's about saying, it's just that simple line of, hey, I take payment up front so I can focus on what I do best, which is create content and not chase invoices. And most times companies are happy to kind of like bend the rules for you, especially if they want to work for you. If someone's like, yep, absolutely, let's do it, or that doesn't suit necessarily, but 50% is great. Like a lot of people are happy to comply and just like help out.
Yes, that's so true. And you never know if you don't ask. The conversation that we're having actually is so timely because this morning I wrote in my newsletter. I was listening to a creator that I really admire, and actually I'm interviewing her later this month, Cody Sanchez, on our podcast.
Love Cody.
And I know she's amazing. And what I don't know if these were, I mean, it's not her original thought, but like something she had quoted recently that really stuck with me is she said, in a negotiation, there's really two elements at play. There's the price and the terms. And she's like, when I come to the table, I tell people, you can have my price and your terms, or your terms and my price, but you can't have both. And what's interesting is, I think especially as, like you said, indie creators or small businesses, we often hyper focus on the price element. And we're like, okay, if we could just get them to agree to whatever price we charge, then that's going to be most favorable for us. When in reality, sometimes if you give a little bit on the price, and I don't mean like to discount yourself, but like if you have multiple different options available, even if they don't go for your highest priced offer, if you're able to control more of those terms, like when you get paid, like the usage or the scope of your work or exclusivity, other factors that influence the terms, I think you can actually have a more favorable outcome sometimes, even than having them agree to a certain price. So
Totally. And I would say, like, instead of going down the route of, oh, I'll give you a discount if you pay up front, the first thing to do would be, oh, I'll give you added value if you pay up front.
yes,
So, hey, I'm doing the podcast for you, amazing. But if you pay up front, I'll also do 2 newsletter features or something that people are like, oh, hell yeah, great, amazing. I love that. Thank you. Definitely pay up front, um,
such a good tip.
versus like instantly going to a discount on pricing, which is still good
Yeah.
and it still works. You can definitely upsell like more content for slightly discounted rate and things like that. But going on the adding like value and that side of things, I think works obviously better in your favor.
Yeah. And that's such a great tip that can even be applied outside of sponsorships. Like, even when you're hosting a sale, right? Like within your business, like I think people automatically assume that a sale or promotion has to mean a discount, but it could mean just added value. Maybe you do a sale where if people buy within this week, they get certain bonuses that haven't been offered before, that are only offered if they buy during this promo window, and you don't have to change the price of your product
Hmm.
at all. So
Yep.
that's such a good point.
Purchase or some kind of downloadable resource, partnering with an author, give away their book like in the PDF format. There, it can be so many things that you can provide value through instead of discounting on price.
I love this so much. So, thank you for walking us through, by the way, that $25,000 deal. There was something you mentioned at the very beginning that you lightly touched on, but I think it's worthwhile to dive a little deeper into. You mentioned that one of your primary goals at that stage in your podcast building journey was that you wanted to be able to find partners who could distribute your content at scale. Now that might be a new concept for a lot of people. On a what is it? A surface level, I understand what you mean by that, but talk to us about how you tangibly executed that. What types of distribution partners were you able to work with to get Female Startup Club into the ears of more listeners?
So I'll give you an example. This partnership, it didn't happen, but I'll give you an example because it's just a really easy one to understand. So I create a lot of content, amazing. Then there are lots of brands out there who, instead of pushing the sales message every day in their newsletter or, buy this, buy this, buy this, they need to add like relevant, valuable content that might be interesting to their listeners. So I would go out and I would pitch certain brands, could you promote my content and in return I'll promote you in the show, or whatever the negotiation is. But a really good kind of niche that I thought would work for me was brands that did kind of journals, like professional journals. And so I was pitching, hey, put this in your newsletter. They have 100,000 subscribers. And then in return, whatever you need, I'll promote you on that side. And so that distribution going into the hands of women who are buying professional journals, who would absolutely be the right listener for me, would be like a great partnership kind of collab. Another example was, again, just like tech businesses who have founders reading their blogs or reading their newsletters. I was able to get a lot of partnerships that way as well. And again, we would just promote it on the back end of our side. But we found that like the value of them being able to provide interesting content that wasn't a sales message, that's not a brand message, is what people can like appreciate and then become more brand loyal to that business as well. So it's about finding people who have the audience overlap, complementary, not competitor, and finding ways to work together where you can cross promote and provide value to each other.
That is so smart because you're right. These brands have to create content one way or the other for their audience. And if they can outsource it in a sense to someone like you who they already know is investing a lot of time and resources in creating quality content, that's less that they have to do. It's a position they don't have to hire for, and they are building a better relationship with their own audience, like you said, by providing that value. So that's brilliant. I am definitely going to take a page out of your book and think about how I can utilize that strategy
Yes,
in
absolutely.
2023. So thank you. See, I feel like this is so meta, this conversation, because like what you said at the beginning, you started doing these interviews because you wanted to get answers to questions that you weren't sure where else to look for those answers. And you had this opportunity by interviewing brilliant female founders. And here I am. I feel the same way sitting in this interview seat, asking people questions like yourself. I feel like I learned so much from every guest, and you have definitely, delivered on that. So thank you. Well, Doone, I before we wrap up this case study, I wanted to ask one more question in pertinence to, negotiating sponsorships. At the time that you landed this $25,000 deal, like you mentioned yourself, you had about 4,000 lifetime downloads, so you were a small show. Obviously, since then, you've garnered many more partnerships and your show has grown significantly to be one of the top shows in the entrepreneurship category. At the time, if you're reflecting back to where you were with this 25K deal, how did you convey the value of your show when this brand, what they prioritized was wanting to reach more listeners, but you had a small reach in listenership at the time? So, how did you convey that value and still allow them to see why it was worthwhile to invest in you?
When I got on that call, I asked myself this too, right? Because they definitely took a little bit of a I wouldn't say a risk, but like they took a chance on me. And I would say it's because of the woman I was talking to on the other side of the screen. She was very passionate within her role at the company about female founders. She was passionate about female voices. She could see it in me. And she was someone who within the company was also spearheading different initiatives. So it was important to her personally. It was like, yes, there are the KPIs and the goals of the company, but her within her role, it was important to her too. And so we were able to connect on that level where she saw the vision, she trusted the vision, and she was like, yes, let's do it. We want to back female voices the way that we say that we're going to do. We don't want to just preach it and not do it. We want to do it. And at that time, there weren't a lot of shows that were extremely targeted and niche to e-commerce, for example. So it was a perfect alignment. So I think like showing your vision, it's really important. And it is important the person who you're talking to on the other side that they're also bought into what you're doing. It can be a little bit harder when you're dealing with someone who doesn't understand or isn't the niche or whatever it might be to get that vision across the line. But in this circumstance, it was really the woman who was on the other side of the screen.
That is really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. I feel like a little nugget I just pulled out of what you said is when you are preparing for a potential collaboration call, negotiation, sponsorship pitch, whatever it is, research not only the company and its values, but like you just mentioned, get to know the actual person who's representing the brand because they come with their own story, priorities, interests, ethos, right? So, like, if you can appeal to that and form that specific connection, having someone on the inside who's going to vouch for you is so powerful. So, love that. Thank you for
You're
sharing that. Just
welcome.
full of golden nuggets today, Dune. All right. My final question for you today, and then of course, I'll give you a chance to share what you're up to and where people can connect. But my final official question for you is what does being a CEO mean to you?
What does being a CEO mean to me? Something that I love about what I do now is the freedom that I have. I enjoy my mornings. I'm never rushing out the door to get on a commute. I've built the life around the lifestyle that I want to have. I want to go for a swim in the ocean every morning. I want a chilled, relaxed morning to kind of peacefully ease into my day, and being able to have my own business and design the lifestyle that I want and need is just the absolute joy of my life. And I think being the owner of your own business does give you that freedom.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think just it's like those weird moments where you're, like, sitting on a plane on a Tuesday or something, and you kind of forget, like, what day of the week it is, and you're like, "What am I even doing?" And it's like it's so cool that you gotta just get to escape whenever you want to, and yet you have built a life that you don't really want to escape from.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I just spent a few days away and it was Monday and Tuesday, but I was able to take calls from where I was. I had my laptop. I was able to check in with my team, but it was just very relaxed, and that's something that I really value in what I'm doing.
Yes, that is definitely the pace I aspire to have. So so Dune, where can our listeners further connect with you? And if there's anything exciting that you're working on that you wanna, give a plug for, we'd love to hear about it.
Oh my gosh, I am just obsessed with TikTok at the moment. Come find me on TikTok. I do these 1 minute quick stories about female founders to share their journey with the ups and the downs. It's kind of the short version of the podcast, and I'm having so much fun doing it. You can slide into my Instagram. They're both the same. It's Doone Roisin, which is DOONE ROISIN. I love to chat. I love to learn about what people are up to. I love to see if I can help. And then on the more kind of product based side of things, we are about to launch our 2.0 networking community called Magic with a J. It is a tool for small business owners, founders, future founders to come and connect, meet with other like minded women who are primarily building e commerce businesses, access hundreds of SOPs, frameworks, blueprints to get the vetted resources and knowledge that you need, and have a lot of fun while building your business.
Amazing. Well, all of those links will be below for you in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, just scroll below and make sure you drop a hello to Dune in her inbox and then also check out Magic. Thank you, Dune.
Thank you so much for having me, Ellen. This was so fun.